Today we're explaining behavioral interviews, the psychological minefield, where engineers pretend to be emotionally intelligent humans, while HR psychoanalyzes their childhood trauma. Not the clean tell us about your teamwork skills version from career centers, but the real implementation where you rehearse fake vulnerability, perform manufactured authenticity, and realize that culture fit is just legalized discrimination with extra steps. 3 engineers, one who survived the STAR method indoctrination to land at Meta, and 45 minutes of pure soft skills horror. I'm Sam, and someone just asked me to describe a time I failed while maintaining eye contact.
I bombed 18 behavioral interviews before I learned to fake human emotions convincingly. 18. The career guides make it sound natural, just be yourself and tell stories. Reality. I spent months crafting fictional narratives about leadership and conflict resolution because my real stories involve debugging segfaults alone at 3 a.m. Apparently, I don't do people drama isn't the right answer.
My job is conducting these fucking interviews while pretending they predict job performance. You know what I really learn? How well someone can perform scripted empathy under pressure. I've hired smooth talkers who were toxic teammates and rejected introverts who became my best engineers.
I study the validity of behavioral interviews. Spoiler alert, they're barely better than random chance at predicting job success. They're standardized theater designed to make HR feel scientific about subjective hiring decisions. It's astrology with PowerPoint presentations.
Dr. Chen, you're our guide through this emotional manipulation hellscape. Alex and Jordan, prepare to explain why performing humanity became a job requirement. No mercy, no hand-waving about cultural alignment.
Let's start simple. What is a behavioral interview actually testing?
Officially, past behavior as a predictor of future performance, communication skills, and cultural fit. Realistically, your ability to craft compelling narratives about mundane work experiences while demonstrating the exact personality traits the interviewer wants to hear.
Why do companies believe this format works?
Because it feels more human than technical tests. Managers think they can spot red flags and cultural misfits by asking about conflict resolution. But really, we're just selecting for people who can perform emotional intelligence, not those who actually possess it.
What's the STAR method everyone obsesses over?
Situation, task, action, result, a storytelling framework that turns every answer into a mini hero's journey. You describe the context, your role, what you did, and the triumphant outcome. It's creative writing for corporate settings, where every mundane project becomes a leadership epic.
How does this framework change how people tell stories?
It sanitizes human experience into corporate propaganda. Real stories are messy, with ambiguous outcomes and shared credit. STAR method forces everything into individual heroism with measurable results. I increased team velocity by 23%. Sounds better than we figured it out together, and I'm not sure why.
What's the most dreaded behavioral question?
Tell me about a time you failed. It's designed to test vulnerability and growth mindset, but it's really asking you to perform weakness in a way that makes you look strong. You need a failure that's significant enough to be meaningful, but not so bad that it disqualifies you.
How do people game this question?
Humble bragging disguised as failure. I worked so hard on a project that I burned out, or I was too perfectionist and missed a deadline. These aren't real failures, they're character flaws that sound like virtues. Actual failures like I caused a production outage because I was drunk don't get shared.
What about conflict resolution questions?
Tell me about a time you disagreed with a coworker. They want to see that you can handle interpersonal tension professionally, but most engineer conflicts are technical disagreements, not personality clashes. I had to invent stories about navigating team dynamics because my real conflicts were about tabs versus spaces.
Why are leadership questions so common?
Because companies assume everyone wants to be promoted into management eventually. Tell me about a time you led without authority tests if you can influence peers and take initiative. But many great engineers just want to code, and forcing leadership narratives feels artificial.
What's the culture fit assessment really measuring?
Whether the interviewer likes you personally. Culture fit is code for would I want to get beer with this person? It's subjective bias dressed up as objective assessment. Introverts get labeled as not collaborative enough, while extroverts are great team players for the same behaviors.
How does this bias affect hiring decisions?
It perpetuates homogeneity. People hire others who communicate like them, share similar backgrounds, or remind them of their younger selves. Culture fit becomes culture clone, and diverse perspectives get filtered out for not matching the existing team's social dynamics.
What about the infamous "why do you want to work here" question?
Pure corporate theater. They want to hear that you're passionate about their mission and have researched their company values. Reality, most people just need a job with good pay and benefits. But saying, I have a mortgage, isn't the inspiring answer they're looking for.
How do you prepare authentic-sounding answers to these questions?
It's method acting for professionals. You take real experiences and reframe them to highlight the traits they want. A debugging session becomes a story about persistence. A code review becomes collaboration. A project delay becomes learning from failure. Same facts, different narrative framing.
What's the psychological impact of performing these interviews?
Imposter syndrome amplification. You're literally performing a fake version of yourself that emphasizes traits you might not naturally have. After enough interviews, you start wondering if the real you is good enough or if you need to become this polished corporate persona permanently.
How do introverts struggle with this format?
Behavioral interviews favor extroverted storytelling styles. Introverts who prefer detailed, thoughtful responses get labeled as lacking energy or not engaging enough. The format penalizes people who need time to process questions or prefer showing rather than telling their capabilities.
What about cultural and language barriers?
Devastating, the STAR method assumes American-style self-promotion is natural and appropriate. Many cultures emphasize collective achievement over individual heroism. International candidates get penalized for being too modest or not taking enough credit when they're just communicating in their cultural norm.
How do you handle questions about weaknesses?
The classic weakness that's actually a strength maneuver: I'm too perfectionist or I work too hard. But interviewers are wise to this now, so you need more sophisticated fake weaknesses that show self-awareness without disqualification. It's weakness theater.
What's the most absurd behavioral question you've encountered?
If you were a tree, what kind of tree would you be and why? I shit you not. Apparently, it tests creativity and self-awareness. I said oak because they're sturdy and reliable, but I really wanted to say poison ivy because that's how these questions make me feel.
How has remote interviewing changed behavioral assessments?
Video calls eliminated body language reading and casual rapport building. Interviewers rely more heavily on verbal responses, which can advantage or disadvantage candidates based on their comfort with video communication. Plus, technical issues become part of the stress response evaluation.
What's the biggest problem with behavioral interview validity?
Past performance in different contexts doesn't predict future performance in new contexts. How I handled conflict at a startup doesn't predict how I'll handle conflict at a 10,000-person corporation. But interviewers treat all experience as universally transferable.
And we're selecting for storytelling ability, not actual competence. Some of my best engineers are terrible at selling themselves in interviews, but brilliant at the actual job. The correlation between interview performance and job performance is embarrassingly low.
Jesus Christ, so we're asking engineers to perform emotional intelligence theater, while HR analyzes their manufactured vulnerability for cultural fit. And everyone pretends this predicts job performance. This is fine.
Welcome to 2025. We've turned hiring into performance art where authenticity is scripted and vulnerability is strategic. The actors are running the theater.
This episode was brought to you by Engineer Panic, where we strip away the soft skills hype and show you the emotional manipulation reality. Because understanding why you failed 18 behavioral interviews despite being emotionally stable is probably important. We're back, let's talk about the practical nightmare of actually surviving these emotional interrogations. Alex, what's the most counterintuitive advice you give?
Embrace the artificiality. Don't try to be authentic, be strategically vulnerable. Craft 3 to 4 polished stories that hit different behavioral competencies and practice them until they sound natural. It's not lying, it's narrative optimization.
Show growth in every story. Never tell a story where you don't learn something or improve a process. Interviewers want to see that you can extract lessons from experiences and apply them going forward. Static narratives suggest you don't evolve.
And mirror the interviewer's communication style. If they're formal, be formal. If they're casual, match that energy. Humans unconsciously prefer people who communicate like them. It's shallow but effective.
What about the biggest red flags that kill behavioral interviews?
Blaming others without acknowledging your role. Even if a project failed because of someone else's incompetence, find something you could have done differently. Taking zero responsibility makes you look like you lack self-awareness and accountability.
Rambling without structure. Behavioral interviews have time limits, and unfocused storytelling suggests poor communication skills. Use STAR method even if you hate it. The framework keeps you on track and hits the points interviewers expect.
And being too honest about negative experiences. My manager was a psychopath might be true, but it makes you sound like someone who doesn't handle difficult relationships professionally. Reframe conflicts as learning opportunities.
What keeps you up at night about the current state of behavioral interviewing?
That we're rewarding performance over authenticity. I know engineers who have become better at fake empathy than real problem solving. We're creating a generation of corporate sociopaths who can manipulate emotional responses on demand.
The systematic bias against neurodivergent candidates. Autistic engineers who struggle with social performance but excel at technical work get filtered out. We're losing brilliant minds because they can't perform neurotypical social scripts convincingly.
That everyone knows it's theater, but we keep pretending it's science. Behavioral interviews make hiring managers feel like they're being rigorous, but the predictive validity is barely above chance. It's elaborate self-deception.
Any final advice for engineers trapped in this emotional performance system?
Learn the game, but don't lose yourself in it. Develop your behavioral interview persona like you'd learn any other professional skill. But remember, it's not your real personality. It's a work costume you put on for specific occasions.
Practice storytelling regularly. Even if behavioral interviews are broken, being able to communicate your accomplishments clearly is valuable for performance reviews, promotions, and career advancement. The skill transfers beyond just interviews.
Remember that rejection often says more about the interviewer's biases than your abilities. If you don't get the job, it might mean you weren't a good cultural fit for that specific team, which could be a blessing in disguise.
This has been Engineer Panic. We've learned that behavioral interviews are emotional performance art disguised as scientific assessment. Everyone's pretending to be vulnerable strategically, and culture fit is just legalized bias with extra steps. Sweet dreams.
Thanks for the group therapy session. Now I'm going back to practicing my fake weakness stories while maintaining authentic eye contact in the mirror.
And I need to design behavioral questions that somehow predict team collaboration while conforming to our standardized emotional theater framework. The cognitive dissonance is real.
Keep engineering, keep being human, keep questioning why we test storytelling when we need problem solvers. The system will change when enough people demand evidence-based hiring practices.
This has been Engineer Panic, where behavioral interviews meet psychological manipulation. Until next time, remember, authenticity is scripted, vulnerability is strategic, and culture fit is bias in a business suit.